Hello, welcome to ECO-595. In this video, we're going to go over Chapter 15, Questionnaire Design. So previously, we talked about different ways to survey, and that includes mail survey, in-person interview, telephone interview, and email survey. So now we need to talk about how to design the questionnaire that to be used during these surveys. Let's get started with an example here about the car. So everyone has his or her dream car, and of course, we would like to have all the features possible to make the car fancy. Now, I have old cars right now, and during the summer, I rented a new car, and it's really great because it gives you alert when a car is passing by beside you, or you're too close to the car in front of you, the system will step in automatically and slow you down, and so many different features. Of course, for my next car, I'm going to definitely want these features. So the question is, of all the features available there, what do customers want most, and how much are they willing to pay for it? Sometimes there are technologies that are fancy but expensive, and even though we may want it, we may not be willing or be able to pay for it. And therefore, for car manufacturers, they would need to survey customers to see what features they should put in the car. And of course, they have to be selective. You can't have all features there. The car will be too expensive. They need to consider the price that consumers are willing to and able to pay. Right? So in the past, DJ Power, a company, surveyed customers, and they did two surveys. In the first survey, they asked customers what features they would like to have on their car, and they asked consumers to rank order the features from the one that they want the most to the one they want the least. And then in their second survey, they provide the price for each feature and ask consumers to rank again. This time, as you can imagine, like for example, there's this night vision system that was chosen by 72% of the customers without price reviewed. Then after the pricing is reviewed to customers saying that, well, if you need this system, it will add $1,500 to the price of the car. Apparently, many customers won't be able to or willing to pay for it. And this system, although previously was very much liked by the customers, now only ranked 17 among all the features that are provided to customers. From this example, we can see that surveys can be helpful, and it also depends on how you ask questions. Now, if you only ask consumers the features they like, you may be misled, because then you will think, oh, okay, so the night vision system is one of the most popular ones. Let's put this on our car. Then when you start to sell the car, of course, you're going to add $1,500 to the car, and you find out that some of the features which add so much cost to the car are not selling well. And this is because you're not doing the right survey. You're not asking the right question. You need to provide the price first to the customer before ask what they are interested in. Now, typically when we say, oh, we need to do a survey, we need to design a questionnaire, people usually think, oh, that's easy to do, that's an easy job. Not really, actually. Questionnaire design is one of the most critical stages in the survey research. Because based on the questionnaire you designed, you are able to collect just what you asked. You're able to collect the data based on just what you asked. And based on the data, you're going to need to analyze to answer a final research question, right? So how good data are and how good the research is really all depends on how good the questionnaire is, because that's the stage where you collect data. Now, the textbook says if you ask a bad question, you will get bad results. And also, typically, I would say for questionnaires, if you can afford it, you don't want to ask an expert to design that for you. Of course, in reality, there are many situations where it might be just a small project, and you may not have the budget to hire a professional to design a questionnaire. And therefore, in this chapter, we're going to talk about a few things that you need to pay attention and discuss a few basics for designing questionnaire. Now, fundamentally, the questionnaire must be relevant and accurate. Okay, so the questions you ask must be relevant to the survey, to the people you survey, and also relevant to your research. We say the questionnaire must be accurate, meaning that when you ask a question, you need to make sure this question is not misleading, this question is unlikely to be understood. You are asking exactly what you wanted to ask. So when you start designing a questionnaire, there are several questions you need to ask. What should be asked? Basically, that depends on your research design. What data you want to collect, that will determine what you need to ask. And second, how should questions be phrased? You might think, well, I just ask whatever I need. If I need age, I ask people's age. If I not need to know gender, I ask gender. That is true. But these are really simple questions. When you get to the complicated part, it's not just like one simple question, what is your age range, right? Especially if you ask opinion about something, you're going to describe it first, then ask consumers to pick. So there, you're going to want to be careful with the words you choose, and be careful with the question you phrased. We're going to talk more about this later. Number 3, in what sequence should the questions be arranged? And yes, that matters, especially when the questions are connected. When the questions are connected to each other, and also the sequence of the question determines how consumers, I keep saying consumers. So the sequence of the question also affects how the respondents respond to your questions. Number 4, what questionnaire layout will best serve the research objectives? And yes, the layout also depends on what type of survey you're conducting, whether it's phone interview or in-person interview, etc. Lastly, how should the questionnaire be pre-tested? Does the questionnaire need to be revised? So actually, pre-test turns out to be a very important stage to design a good questionnaire, because you may not be inclusive. You may find out that more data will be needed after conducting the survey. So it's better for you to do a pre-test to see how it works out, and then determine your final version of the questionnaire. In the following, we're going to go through these questions one by one and see what we need to pay attention. Number 1, what should be asked, right? So this is related to questionnaire relevancy and questionnaire accuracy. What should be asked? Of course, whatever we need should be asked. However, there are times that in a questionnaire, we may see a question that is kind of out of place, kind of irrelevant. So this requires the designer to be careful, to be thorough. Go through a questionnaire, make sure all questions are relevant to the current situation, and you don't ask about anything that is irrelevant. Details can make the questionnaire unnecessarily long, and that will make the respondents so tired, so bored with the questionnaire. And that is definitely something you don't want to happen, because it will reduce your response rate. So in that case, you want to go through the questions very carefully to make sure every question is critical, every question is absolutely needed for collecting the data. Okay, so the second part is we want the questionnaire to use simple English, and you want to use the words that are very understandable, that is not biased, and you also want to make sure you use words that will not irritate people. Especially you don't want to use word that is kind of emotionally charged. This is because if you use emotional words like great, fantastic, disaster, things like that, that will lead people to certain direction, right? And you don't want to impose your own feeling or opinion in the questionnaire. You also want to make sure your question wording and sequencing is in a natural way that will not confuse people, or it will not solicit biased answers. Then, as we progress, you will see examples where the sequence of the question may mislead your respondents. So now let's get to talk about specific questions. There are basically two types of, broadly speaking, there are two types of questions. One is called open-ended response questions, and the other is called fixed alternative questions, or basically that's just multiple choice questions. So open-ended questions are almost like short answer or fill in the blank. Okay, and both types of questions have their pros and cons. For open-ended question, the advantage will be if you ask an open-ended question, you do not need to come up with the answer, the alternatives for your respondents to choose. And this is because there might be situations you just don't know what answer you would expect, and you don't want to exclude any potential there, right? For example, you may ask about the design of a product. And if you just give your customers like 3 or 4 choices, customer may have better idea, and with just the 3 or 4 choices, they have to force themselves to pick one instead of expressing their own idea. And typically for telephone interview, open-ended question may be a good start because you want the respondent to warm up first. You want to start this conversation by a casual conversation, and you don't want to start with just question asking, do you agree with the following statement, and yes or no, right? It is also sometimes a very good question to be put at the end. The reason being, I'm sure you've seen surveys asking you to evaluate the service received at certain restaurant or certain store, and at the end they usually ask you to provide further comments if you want to, and that is open-ended questions. Now, the disadvantage of open-ended questions is apparently for open-ended questions, they can be biased, right? Because individuals, for open-ended questions, individuals will need to come up with their own answer, and they may just provide a long sentence, and when you try to interpret this sentence, you may introduce bias there. Also, giving open-ended question can be costly because for mail survey, if you use open-ended questions a lot, you're going to reduce the response rate. People do not have that much time to write a lot. If you want to give a survey, multiple choice will be the best way, right? Because they can just click on, or not really click, they can just mark on several choices and they're done with the survey instead of writing long sentences out there. So usually open-ended questions are used in in-person interview or phone interview. The other type, let me skip the previous slide for right now. The other type of question is called fixed alternative questions, or I would just say multiple choice questions. For these type of questions, the respondents are given choices, and there are specific choices they can choose from. Of course, the advantage will be the disadvantage of open-ended questions, right? Advantage will include take less time to answer. Respondents just check the choice, and it doesn't require much interview skills. You don't really need to use this in only in-person interview or telephone interview. You can use this type of question in email survey or mail survey. And also, this will provide the respondents potential answers. Sometimes you ask open-ended questions, the respondents may just draw a blank. They don't know what to put there. But if you provide several solutions, several alternative choices for them, they will have some idea as to how to answer it. Now, the disadvantage of fixed alternative questions will be, again, look, you provide the fixed alternatives, then typically if the respondents have something else in mind, they can't put their answer there. And this is why sometimes you would see for certain fixed alternative questions, the designer will put one last choice saying others or something else and provide a blank for this respondents to provide something else other than the choices provided. This, to a certain extent, eliminate a disadvantage of fixed alternative questions. So next I want to talk about an example where both type of questions are used and they serve different purpose here. So Wall Street Journal usually reports the reputation of well-known companies, and they sponsor an annual research project conducted by a company called Harris Interactive. So Harris Interactive used this Harris Reputation Quotient survey to access the reputations of the 6 most visible companies in the US. Now, the first question is which 60 companies they access. Well, as you can imagine, the 60 most visible companies in the US will change from time to time. A company that maybe, like for example, Google, Apple, a decade ago, they are just small companies, right? Relatively small companies. I shouldn't say small companies, relatively small companies, but they grow so fast. So the first step for the survey will be to determine which 60 companies they want to assess. And then for the first stage is open-ended questions to respondents, asking them to determine the 60 companies that are most visible or the most important or the most well-known company in the US. Then in the second stage, since they've already determined that these are the 60 companies, in the second stage, they can use fixed alternative questions to evaluate each company, ask consumers to evaluate the company from different perspectives, like product, service, their financial performance, their workplace environment, etc. Right? So this is a case where both type of questions are used and both type of questions are necessary for different purpose here. And just to this, I believe this is really outdated information, but Johnson & Johnson used to be top ranked for the first 7 years of the survey. I believe things changed a lot nowadays. It seems like in general, if you are conducting questionnaire survey or email survey or online survey, actually, fixed alternative questions are relatively commonly used. So, and therefore, I want to warn you a few things that you need to pay attention, because when you provide fixed alternative questions, you're providing choices for respondents. You want to make sure the choices are totally exhaustive and they're also mutually exclusive. So totally exhaustive means that you include every possibility for respondents to choose from, right? For example, if you are serving people, you're asking about their income, right? And if you somehow provide the choices only include income from potentially 0 to 20,000, 200,000, sorry, and we're talking about annual income here. So potentially, if you only provide choices between 0 income and 200,000, then who knows, maybe you survey someone that's really rich, right? You're excluding some choices for your respondents to answer. And that's what we mean. We want it to be totally exhaustive meaning you include every potential there. We also want the choices to be mutually exclusive, meaning that not one possibility is included in two or more choices here. And I've got an example to show you really quick so that you maybe understand what I mean by mutually exclusive. So again, let's say you're asking about people's income, annual income for the family maybe. I have two examples here. In the first one, the choices are provided as 10,000 to 30,000, 30,000 to 50,000, 50,000 to 70,000, etc. And you can probably immediately notice that for people who have income at the border, at the range, at the edge, say for example, if someone is earning $30,000 a year, then this person will have a hard time determining which choice exactly he or she needs to choose. And some people will just look randomly and say, oh, okay, I see 30,000 here, I'm going to choose that choice. It also belongs to the next one. And different people will have different judgment. Therefore, the data you collected actually would not be accurate. So a better way to do that is the next example where we include 30,000 or 50,000 only in one choice. Like for example, you start with less than 10,000, and then the next choice will be 10,000 to 29,999. Okay. All right. So apparently we're ignoring the cents. We're not looking at $29,999.99, but usually we can round it up. But that's the basic idea. So the second example is mutually exclusive. For people who are earning 30,000, they can definitely pick that choice, and they don't have a dilemma here as to which choice they should choose.